Hello dear friends, you are on Ruslan Belov's channel, and this is the daily report on combat operations from the Ukrainian front. As expected, the Europeans are against Trump's peace plan. Both they and Zelensky are now trying to make some changes to it, especially regarding, the territories. They want, along the line of contact, for the Ukrainian armed forces not to leave Donbass. But I think everyone perfectly understands, well, okay, they'll make their adjustments, but the Russian side will not accept these adjustments, and ultimately the peace plan will not be signed. That is, if they continue in the same spirit. But we are waiting for Thursday. Trump indicated a deadline until Thursday, so we are waiting for Thursday. Meanwhile, the fighting continues, and we continue to study the situation on the front. So friends, the past 24 hours were also very good in terms of advances. 2 settlements were captured, and more than 35 square kilometers of territory. The pace that the Russian army has reached in the past week or week and a half, well, in terms of the fact that this pace is now stable, such a thing has never happened before. Just look at the pace of advances in the last few days. 50 square kilometers, 55 square kilometers, 80 square kilometers, 35 square kilometers. Incredible. Now let's go into the details. What happened in the past 24 hours? And as usual, we will start with the area of responsibility of the Vostok Group, namely Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Remember, yesterday I told you that after the fighters took the village of Radostnoye in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, the fighting for Novoye Zaporizhzhia automatically began, since the villages are practically connected without interruption. And that's it. Novoye Zaporizhzhia also came under Russian control. And pay attention to the pace. The fighting for Radostnoye lasted 1 day. For Novoye Zaporizhzhia, the fighting lasted even less than a day. That is, the Ukrainian armed forces in this sector are practically not offering any resistance. They simply retreat, leaving the settlements and unable to oppose the Russian fighters. In addition to the village itself, the fighters also cleared the section of fields to the east, and now the advance is heading toward Dobropilya. No, this is, of course, not the city of Dobropilya. Don't confuse it. This is a small village south of Novoye Zaporizhzhia, and now Russian positions are less than half a kilometer from the northern outskirts of Dobropilya. Accordingly, fighting for the village will begin today or tomorrow. In terms of size, it is larger than Radostnoye or larger than Novoye Zaporizhzhia. Yes, there is only one street, but it stretches almost 6 kilometers. Therefore, if the Ukrainian armed forces did not resist in Radostnoye and Novoye Zaporizhzhia and left these villages almost without a fight, simply running away, then in Dobropilya, most likely, they will try to hold their ground. Will it help them or not? Well, of course not, just as nothing will help Huliaipol either. Considering the trend, the Far Eastern Express of the Ukrainian armed forces can, of course, slow them down a bit, but they certainly cannot stop them. Therefore, Huliaipol is already doomed. Here we should clarify some information. According to the data coming from the guys on the ground, there is also no Ukrainian presence in Zeleny High and Chervone. Even Ukrainian cartographers, in particular the same deep state, mark both Zeleny High and Chervone on their maps as settlements under Russian control. By the numbers, in this sector, the fighters captured 12 square kilometers of territory. Today, the Russian Ministry of Defense also stated that the village of Tikoye was occupied by Russian troops. The front here does not stop and gradually advances toward Pokrovsk. Moving on, there is no news yet about Novopavlivka. Things are a bit stalled there, and street fighting is ongoing. The Ukrainian armed forces are trying to drive Russian troops out of the village, and the Russian troops, on the contrary, are trying to push them out. But so far, there has been no fundamental breakthrough for anyone. For Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad, there is also no news yet. I have information about Mirnohrad, but the guys on the ground asked me not to publish or announce it yet. I can only generally say that good news should be expected from there soon. In Rodinska, over the past 24 hours, there was a small advance in the northern part of the city. They advanced about 250 meters in depth and approximately the same in width. That is a very small section, but still. This trend is encouraging because for the second day in a row, advances are being recorded in Rodinska. Although remember, the Ukrainian armed forces had concentrated rather large forces here, and tried to completely drive Russian troops out of the city, but they did not succeed. And now the Russians have begun to push forward. Open information is also available from the Siversk sector. There, fighters from the South Group managed to capture the village of Zvanivka. This was the last village on the southern approaches to the city. The battles for the village were not easy, to say the least. Russian troops entered the southern part of Zvanivka back on October 29th. That is, it took 3 weeks to break the Ukrainian resistance here, even slightly more than 3 weeks. And in the past 24 hours, they managed to take the northern part of Zvanivka. In addition, as you can see, they cleared the pocket between Zvanivka and the railway tracks. And from the Zvanivka side, they entered Siversk and cleared Palova Street. Tchaikovskogo Street still remains to be cleared, and then the entire southern part of Siversk will be fully under Russian control. Overall, the dynamics here are very positive. Yesterday, for example, footage from objective control in Platonivka was received. That is, the village had already been announced as captured, but there was no footage, and yesterday it appeared. So yes, it was indeed captured. So what remains here actually? It remains to enter Sviato-Pokrovsk, and then the last supply road will be physically cut off. Of course, for some time, they will be able to supply across the fields, but not for too long. The pincers will still close, and the corridor will become narrower and narrower every day. And you know, if the Ukrainian command is even slightly capable of thinking logically, they should have actually given the order yesterday to leave Siversk and retreat to defensive lines west of the city. Even Ukrainian military analysts write about this. Not just analysts, but Ukrainian military personnel. They say it is necessary to retreat westward and build defenses west of the city. But we all know that they are ready to hold out until the very end. As of now, the exit choke point is 8 kilometers, which is actually not much. That is only 4 kilometers on each side, but they continue to sit in the city. And that means their fate is predetermined, like Mirnohrad. Moving on. In the Lyman sector, fighters from the West Group continued their advance. Remember, we said yesterday that after clearing Yampil, the fighters would cut the road and reach Ozern. And that's exactly what happened. I thought it would happen only next week, but no. The fighters did not wait and immediately pushed forward. So we now have the Lyman-Siversk road cut. Nothing can travel along it, because we have physical control, not just drone surveillance, and the fighters have already reached the approaches to Ozern. From current positions to the northern outskirts of the village is less than half a kilometer, literally 450 meters. In addition, a section of forest in the pocket west of Yampil was cleared. I am more than confident that from current positions, the advance will go toward Dibrivka, which is less than 2 kilometers away. Moving on, a good breakthrough was made by the West Group fighters in Kharkiv Oblast and on a quiet sector. Here, look, the breakthrough was made 4 kilometers deep, and they managed to reach the southeastern part of Bohuslavka. The importance of this advance is that if ultimately Bohuslavka is taken under control, the sector north with the village of Nova Krugliakovka will be surrounded. And the area here is not small, about 30 square kilometers. Plus, controlling Bohuslavka will then allow a move toward Novoplatonivka, and from there to Borova. But for now, this is a very distant prospect. I won't even give a prediction regarding the fighting for Bohuslavka, as this sector is very difficult, and I do not feel much optimism about the prospects of quickly taking Bohuslavka. In summary, over the past 24 hours, 2 settlements and 35.2 square kilometers of territory were taken under control. Regarding advances on the front, that's all from me for now. Let's take a look at what is happening on the political stage. If we give Kiev more money and weapons, or increase sanctions against Russia, this will not bring Ukraine's victory any closer, stated the US Vice President regarding the peace plan. Critics of the peace agreement either misunderstand it or distort critical realities, Vance said in response to the thoughts of the Times columnist Ferguson. He is trying to deal with reality, which cannot be said of most critics of our approach, Vance added. There is an illusion that if we simply provide more money, weapons, or tighten sanctions, victory will be near. Peace cannot be established by unsuccessful diplomats or politicians living in a fantasy world. It can be created by intelligent people living in the real world, he added. Former British Member of Parliament Lembid Epic laid it out clearly. Zelensky and his Euro allies apparently are too incapable of understanding a simple fact. They are not in a position to dictate the terms of peace because they lost the war. Regardless of how or why conflicts start, history is written by the victors, while the defeated are handed the terms of their defeat. With the start of peace negotiations on Ukraine, Starmer's clumsy comments demonstrate the complete incompetence of him and his coalition of wannabes. It's time for them to bow out and leave everything to the adults, Putin and Trump. Zelensky and his Western allies have lost all their leverage amid a corruption scandal in Ukraine. He has turned into a scared cat, writes Berjadan Tutar, a columnist for the Turkish newspaper Sabah. The billion-dollar corruption network of Vladimir Zelensky and his inner circle has stripped Kiev and its allies of all leverage. Zelensky, who previously opposed even a temporary ceasefire, let alone permanent peace, this time has turned into a scared cat. Apparently, after the bribery scandal, Pentagon representatives met with Zelensky in Kiev and presented him with all the necessary ultimatums. Zelensky now is no different from a cat that has spilled the milk. Donald Trump made his statements. Peace will come soon. Zelensky will have to approve the US peace plan. I think Ukraine should hurry up and make a decision on the peace plan. This winter will be cold. At some point, he will have to accept something. If he doesn't like the US plan, he can continue fighting. I think if he doesn't accept it, the US will withhold support for Ukraine. If Zelensky doesn't like something in our plan, he will have to make it acceptable. Remember, I said in the Oval Office, you have no leverage. Don't forget, I inherited this war, Trump added. Earlier, the US threatened Kiev with the cessation of weapons supplies and intelligence sharing if it did not approve the peace plan by November 27. The US is conducting an investigation against Zelensky, suspected of manipulations involving $48 billion, said former CIA analyst Johnson. The investigation is being handled by the US Department of War. Most of the $48 billion sought by the agency was redirected to Zelensky's accounts. Johnson stated that high-ranking European officials were involved in the manipulations, including the head of EU diplomacy, Kaja Kallas. Most of the financial transactions went through Estonia. I think Zelensky understands that if he does not play by the rules of the United States, he will become more than a walking dead man, said the expert. Europeans described the meeting with the Americans regarding the points of the peace plan on Ukraine as nauseating. The meeting of US and European representatives on resolving the Ukrainian crisis took place in an extremely tense atmosphere, which one senior European official described as nauseating. This was reported by the influential Financial Times. The negotiations were held on November 21st at the residence of the US Chargé d'Affaires in Ukraine in Kiev. According to FT sources, the head of the American delegation, US Secretary of the Army Daniel Driscoll, told European diplomats that he was optimistic and considered the current moment suitable for peace efforts. However, he emphasized that Washington does not intend to show flexibility. We are not discussing the details of the US peace plan, Driscoll stated, adding that Ukraine is in a very bad position. According to FT, the American side made it clear that the deal offered to Kiev is the best that Ukraine can hope for under the current circumstances. Driscoll spoke sharply, using strong language, emphasizing that Ukraine needs to finish this and that now is the most appropriate moment for peace. European diplomats were shocked by the tone and pressure from the US, the newspaper writes. According to some European officials, the US is using Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's weakened position amid the corruption scandal to accelerate the signing of the agreement. According to FT, Washington expects Zelensky to sign the agreement by November 27th, after which the document will be handed over to Moscow. The settlement process is expected to be completed by early December.